Hi folks, my name is Gerdes, just a professor, and I've been trying to help you understand context in the war in Ukraine. Now this video that I'm about to do is interesting because it's the intersection between what I've been talking about with Ukraine on one channel and my topic that I have spent years studying, and that's leadership. In fact, I'm probably going to put this on both channels. If you don't know what I'm talking about, before the war began, I was doing this on Professor Gerdes, management professor, author, on this particular channel. If you just look up at Professor Gerdes as opposed to at Professor Gerdes, you'll see me talk about leadership. This is what I was doing before the war began, and this is what I'm a management professor who built multiple leadership programs at my university. Okay, so this is really interesting because it crosses these two so beautifully. So I want to talk about Zaluzhny. I want to talk about a profile of the man and why he is where he is right now, where we're talking about rumors of him being fired. So I'm going to start here with this Pravda article. Pravda, RU, if you don't know, that's Russian news. It's mostly propaganda. Poroshenko, the former president of Ukraine, was talking about how Zaluzhny's dismissal rumors shocked the EU. I'm in Brussels. Our partners are shocked by the rumors about Zaluzhny's dismissal. Well, Poroshenko and Zelensky don't exactly get along. I mean, they're pulling together to win the war, but they're still opponents politically, like a Biden and a Trump, or even take Trump out of the picture, a Biden and, let's say, Haley or something. They'd still be political opponents, even if they want the same national goals. According to Poroshenko, the president of Ukraine should neither sign nor publish a decree on the resignation of the commander-in-chief. Well, Zelensky looked like he was about to do it, and when the rumors spilled out, things happened. You can see RT making some hay out of this. You see it in Pravda. You see it in TASS. So let's look at two particular articles. One is the Kyiv Post, and this will give a profile of the man, and then we're going to look at an article in the Washington Post. And in the Washington Post article, we're going to see something a little bit different. It'll show you why he is where he is and some of the backstory. So the Kyiv Post article was fascinating because it really shows us who he is and how we got to where we are. And I think you can give Zaluzhny a lot of credit for what has actually happened in the war, and I'll show you why. So in a post on Telegram, the Ministry of Defense said, "Dear journalist, we immediately answered everyone, no, it's not true, these rumors that he had been fired." Well, he was almost fired. He didn't submit his resignation as asked, it looks like, apparently, from what I've read. And he's probably going to be fired. I think it's kind of like... this isn't quite a fair analogy, but Prigozhin was kind of a dead man walking for 3 months. I think that might be where, not that he's going to be assassinated, but I think that might be where Zaluzhny is. He's fired, but it's just a matter of time unless something really radically reverses. Same thing with the former head of the defense, the civilian head of defense, that was kind of Reznikov, who was in kind of the same place. Okay, earlier, the former Ukrainian lawmaker claimed that he had received confirmation that Zaluzhny had been fired. In a post on Facebook, he wrote, "My sources from the president's office have informed me that Zaluzhny has been dismissed from the post of commander-in-chief of the armed forces. I sincerely hope that this information is not confirmed. However, second source has already confirmed it." Alexei Gonchenko, this guy always puts out really good stuff, was also posting about this at the same time. Okay, Zaluzhny's background. So Valery Zaluzhny, the future general, was born on July 8th of 1973. He's about 50 years old. In Novhorod-Volhynsky, now Zavil, which was then a military garrison. His father being a serving Soviet military officer, so this was kind of the family business. He followed somewhat reluctantly in the footsteps of his military family. He entered Odessa Land Forces Institute in the early 1990s, graduating with honors in 1997. Now, if you look at that time frame, early 1990s into 97, the Soviet Union was collapsing and Ukraine was becoming its own entity again. By the way, somebody sent me this book. It was Ukrainia Redux. And the book, it's a very thin volume, but it shows you very clearly that Ukraine had been a nation, and then again, and then again, and then again. And so this idea, like even starting when the UN began as its own nation within the Soviet Union, It's showing very clear evidence that what they're saying, Ukraine never existed, it just isn't true. That's a digression, but thank you for sending me the book. By the way, if you do want me to read something, ebooks are a little bit easier. I mean, I can cut through a Kindle very, very quickly by listening to it as opposed to reading, but thank you. I do appreciate that. Okay, he entered the Odessa Land Forces Institute in the 90s. Having seen the military during the Soviet era through the eyes of his father, he realized that the modern Ukrainian army needed to rid itself of the old USSR military dogma that relied on rigid, top-heavy decision-making and a need to better resemble the NATO model, where an officer needed to be a leader first, not just a commander. Now, this paragraph sang to me. This is the kind of thing I preach in class all the time, because we do this in business as well, where we're looking at, like the people at the top, all the managers go in the back room and they huddle together and they say, okay, here's our plan. Here's our plan. Now do our plan. And people like at the front line that are looking at this at the bottom of the pyramid, they're going like, that's not going to work. But they were never invited into the process. So because of that, they just never got a chance to really have input, and they know the plan won't work, and they dig in because they know it won't work. And this is kind of what's going on in the Soviet model, where it's very top heavy. So the top heavy decision making is great for centralization, but it's terrible for flexibility. Okay, and so that's one of the things that he realized, and this gave Ukraine a significant edge when the war broke out in 2022. So the next 17 years or so, a rapid, if not particularly spectacular rise from his initial role as a platoon leader, he goes up the ranks. The war in Ukraine breaks out in 2014 with Moscow's annexation of Crimea, their involvement in Donbass. So it was here that the theories that he developed about how to command effectively were put to the test. So he got a dry run at this, but on a smaller scale as he was moving up the ranks. He said he had read a lot of books. I'd graduated from all the academies with gold medal. I understood everything theoretically, but I did not understand what war really meant. And that's a difference, right? Like, you don't learn to lead by reading a book about it. You have to actually experience it as well. As much as I want my students to read their books, I also want them to practice leadership, because that's the way it works. It works like that with a number of things in life. Leadership takes time. Like, you have to learn how to lead. Love, wisdom, judo, you can't like read a book and then just go flawlessly perform a judo throw, right? It just doesn't work. Same kind of thing. Some of these things take both understanding, knowledge, cognitive, and practice. Okay, this period culminated in him graduating from the National University, Ostra Academy 2020, with a master's degree. His thesis for which was a comparison, listen to this, his thesis was a comparison between the Ukrainian and U.S. military structures. He's almost perfectly geared for what was going to come in 2022, because he had this background and he understood the differences between the way they function and the way the U.S. function, and by proxy NATO, right? And so he's learning and piecing this kind of thing together. His studies and his experience during the fighting in Donbass became the basis of his own doctrine for how he and those around him should exercise leadership and command. And it's going to be very different than just follow orders. The war in Donbass shaped his ideas and basically created this flexible structure within the Ukrainian armed forces, seeing how wars are being conducted in contemporary times. Quote, you see, there was this mix. He's done something on the battlefield. He commands his troops. He goes back to studying. He gets promoted. He does a little bit of everything. And that quote was from a research fellow at the Defense Studies Department of King's College, right? So, like, he's getting it. He's understanding a Western military doctrine in a way that the Russians really don't. They might understand that the West thinks this way, but they don't practically understand it or apply it. The glaring obvious missing link was leader development. Stop. Full stop. Yes, what you have to do is not just tell people what to do, but help them grow so that they have the capacity to be able to do those things that you need them to do. And he got that. He understood it, and he started being intentional about his junior officers and his senior non-commissioned officers and working that into them. And I think that has probably saved tens of thousands of lives. And I don't think that that's an overestimation for Ukraine. He added, so he set in motion starting in 2014 to really change the way Ukraine military develops leaders. He developed a series of commanders under him who mirror his leadership style. They helped train the army to be much more agile, much more Western, really developing the junior leaders, the sergeants, and the lieutenants and the captains to be much more innovative, problem solving, very different than the old Soviet armies. So instead of just follow these orders and do what I say, whether you have the information or not, listening to what's happening on the ground, on the front line, and then actively reacting to what you're listening to and engaging with that is really important. According to Time magazine on 27 June 2021, the now commander of Operational Command North was drinking a beer at his wife's birthday party when he stepped outside to take a cell phone call. It was shocked to hear the voice of Zaluzhny, who became president of Ukraine 2 years prior, who told him that he was being appointed as commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine. That's a jump of several rungs above his position on the career ladder, and many expected that Syrsky would be put in charge. The two, Syrsky and Zaluzhny, have proved to be an indispensable team as they're both fully focused on winning the war. Now, they could have been rivals as a consequence, but they were both focused on the same target. Zaluzhny has become so popular that both allies and opponents of Zelensky feel that he could become a political threat. Okay, that's problem number one that's leading to this, but I don't think that's all of it. Okay, some of those anti-Zaluzhny political insiders began to agitate to replace him with Syrsky. These calls had become so vocal last summer, that a number of Western military officials expressed concern that cracks were forming in the unity essential to win the war. So there are political reasons to be agitating here that is not going to be helpful to Ukraine, but helpful politically. And that happens everywhere. That's happening in America right now. The president and both generals dismissed any talk of rivalry of this kind at the time. Zaluzhny says, quote, "I trust Syrsky. If he tells me that he needs another brigade, it means he really needs another brigade. I certainly don't think I'm the smartest one here. I must do and listen to those who are in the field." That beautifully mirrors what I'll be talking about in class next week using Colin Powell's book, It Worked for Me in Life and Leadership. We're talking about this in my Power and Influence class right now. Powell is talking about the same thing. Like, I'm the commander, but my job as the commander and your job as the staff working for me is to listen to our commanders on the ground. Like, that's beautiful. He's getting it. He understands it. Zaluzhny, by the way, I'll put this link down below if you want that to see what Powell had to say and look at that more fully. This is a great book on just everything related to leadership. Okay, Zaluzhny does what he does best. As the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, I'm responsible for combat readiness, training, and the use of armed forces, he told in a radio interview. That's right, and that's what's bringing him to the conflict right now with Zelensky. Zelensky's the president. He needs to make sure that they have the arms and ammunition and weapons provided from partners and that kind of thing. The Zaluzhny is looking at combat readiness. He's looking at how many soldiers they actually have. Now, this is becoming a problem because he brought this out publicly and Zelensky didn't want to deal with that particular number. And I'm not taking anything away from Zelensky. Where you stand depends on where you sit, right? And so Zelensky's looking at it from one end and Zaluzhny's looking at it from another. Okay, that's Miles' law, by the way. Where you stand depends on where you sit. It is the ground forces commander who was primarily instrumental in Ukrainian troops' successful defense of Kyiv in the early days of the war. Without Zaluzhny, I mean, the early days of the war might have been a disaster because the doctrine that he brought in to think through how to give the flexibility rather than just top-down tell. I think it saved countless lives. And yeah, last little bit, Zaluzhny has made relatively few public appearances, but one of them really got under Zelensky's skin because it's at odds with the boss and what they're trying to say. And he prefers to leave these to his more charismatic president, which is a good idea to leave Zelensky to do most of the talking while he does the military commanding. Okay, let's get back to the Washington Post article now. And Zelensky to oust Ukraine's top general amid tension over the new mobilization. So now that we have a profile of who Zaluzhny is, let's talk about what the actual conflict is. Zaluzhny remains in his post for now, but a formal, and this article came out today in the Washington Post, but a formal presidential decree is expected to confirm his ousting. We don't know when. It'll come probably sometime soon, but not right away. They have to work through some things first. But again, I think that's probably the case unless something radically changes. A highly anticipated counteroffensive using soldiers trained by NATO, allies with Western weapons and equipment, reclaimed little territory, falling far short of expectations. Zaluzhny and his American counterparts disagreed sharply over tactics, and the Ukrainian commander ultimately ignored U.S. advice to concentrate his forces, which he believed could have led to far higher casualties. Okay, so what's happening here? So when the counteroffensive happened, they gamed it out. They did military war gaming and that kind of planning to, and the U.S. was advising select one point and punch through, right? Like that's what you need to do. Zaluzhny didn't do that. He continued to attrit the Russians. So let's keep wearing the Russians down. Because when they started to try to punch through, they ran into severe obstacles, minefields and shelling and whatever, and they didn't have, in Zaluzhny's defense, they didn't have air superiority or combined arms in order to be able to really punch through. The punching through was going to be severely costly, and he chose not to do that, choosing instead to conduct war with Russia on multiple fronts. Because remember, Russia had months to dig in, to mine, to put trenches up, to put obstacles in their way. And the Ukrainians did not have the right weapons, the right tools in order to get through. Zaluzhny understood that. He understood it was going to be costly, and he chose to do it a different way. And that kind of created a rift between the Americans, who were advising him punch through. This is going, like, use a laser-like focus and just get through there. And the Ukrainians. Okay, so let's keep going. Two individuals spoke about the meeting on condition of anonymity. Senior members said that Zaluzhny's staff are also expected to be removed, according to one person. Zaluzhny proposed, the first problem was that he had this problem with the counteroffensive. It didn't work because they didn't do it the way that they were advised to do it, but they didn't have the equipment to be able to do that. The second one is that he proposed the mobilization of 500,000 troops, a figure that Zelensky viewed as impractical, given the scarcity of uniforms, guns, training facilities, potential challenges related to recruitment, the people said. Zelensky also publicly said that Ukraine lacks the funds to pay so many new conscripts. So Zelensky's on one page and Zaluzhny's on another, and they're conflicting again. Remember, Zelensky's in charge. He's the president, duly voted in. Zaluzhny countered that Ukraine is already short of forces due to mounting casualties and needs to match 400,000 new soldiers that Russia plans to mobilize. So they do need to amp up. Zelensky is looking at that, and again, they're working the mobilization bill through the Rada right now, and we'll see how that all plays out. Who will replace the 50-year-old Zaluzhny? One leading candidate is Ukraine's head of military intelligence, that's Lieutenant General Budanov, potentially signaling a move toward asymmetric tactics. And that's how the Ukrainians have been successful against the Russians since the counteroffensive began. They haven't really taken much ground, but they've destroyed multiple facilities within Russia with drone attacks. They've destroyed multiple Russian ships in the Black Sea. And that seems to be the way of the future, but he doesn't have any experience as an army commander. He does the asymmetric special warfare kind of thing, but not the ground forces kind of thing. Another option is Colonel General Alexander Syrsky, the commander of Ukraine's ground forces. And that's who we would have expected before Zaluzhny was picked. Zaluzhny was offered another post but declined and plans to retire from the military. Last year, the head of Zelensky's faction in parliament announced that Reznikov, then a defense minister, would be ousted. But Reznikov stayed in the post for months before being removed. And this is why I'm saying I think he probably will be, but it's going to be some time before that happens. That's the plan, at least for now. Maybe something could change, but I think that's probably a fair read. Friction between Zelensky and Zaluzhny has been brewing for months, and the general has expected he could be dismissed since the summer of 2022, the person said. Zaluzhny has been Ukraine's commander-in-chief since Russia's invasion in February 22, and according to opinion polls, rivals Zelensky in popularity, again making a potential threat. So that's strike number 3 there. That's not the whole reason. I don't think Zelensky is petty like that, but it is part of what is undermining this. Last fall, Zaluzhny, now this one's big. Last fall, Zaluzhny referred to the war as a stalemate in an interview with The Economist magazine. Zelensky publicly rebuked those remarks. Now, I understand stalemate was part of a translation issue, true, but nonetheless, and this was in The Economist, if you remember this article, and Zaluzhny was saying, with the weapons that we have, we can't do anything different than what we have. We need other weapons. And it created a real headache for Zelensky, although he's not wrong. They can't really do much more than what they were doing with the weapons that they have. But mercifully, we'll see that things like some GLDBs should be arriving. Today is January 31st, and they're supposed to be arriving now. But that's not enough. They need more things to break through in order to be successful. But that was the big thing that got Zaluzhny in. That was like strike 4 that got him in hot water. And so that's where we are with Zaluzhny. I think he's a good man who has done a great job. He didn't take the advice of punching through, but if you didn't have the materials that you needed to be able to really punch through, I don't know. He might have been the guy that prolonged the war, but he might have been the guy that saved them from ultimately going under as well. Tell me what you think about this. I'd love to hear your thoughts about this. I mean, I just think like he's done a great job, but he's not without flaws. And these tensions are normal in leadership, and they generally have to be managed. Okay, thank you for your time, and thank you for the comments below. I'm looking forward to reading them.